Welcome, everyone. I'm Simon. I'm one of the directors at Steps, and I have the good fortune to have as a client US-based, Philadelphia-based law firm Dechert. And I'm joined today by an old friend and long-term client, Satra Sampson-Arokium, who currently is the Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at Dechert. That's right, isn't it, Satra?
That is quite correct, Simon. So I sit on what we call our management committee, which is comprised of the other chiefs in the company or in the law firm, as well as the practice group leaders and our CEO and COO of the firm. And it's so important to have someone in my role have a seat at the table, because sometimes, decisions are being made at that table, and you want to ensure that the person who sits in that role have a voice, is able to help people think about biases that may creep in decisions that they make. So it's so important that someone who is, whether it's the director of diversity and inclusion or the chief diversity officer, take that seat and provide that perspective that others may not be thinking about.
I wanted to ask you today, Satra, in this extraordinary world we live in, everything changed last March globally. And I'm really curious what the world was like for you in your role and what happened to the work around then, Satra. What was it like for you?
I happened to be in London.
Right.
I happened to be in London getting ready for some very big events. And then we started getting mandates that we needed to think about whether we would cancel events or continue to have these events that we had planned to host in London. Prior to coming to London, I was actually in Germany, and at midnight, we had to make a call as to whether we'd move forward with a Global Women's Initiative programming or cancel that. Before I left Germany, late that night, we made the decision that it was best to cancel the program, for fear that, not even the fear of the coronavirus itself, but for fear that the US may close down our borders and would not be able to get back into the country. So we made the hard decision. Yes, we lost some monies with hotels and so forth, but I would say ultimately it was the right decision. It made sense to put our people first.
So then in the ensuing kind of weeks, as what's subsequently been coined the new normal kicked in, I'm aware that a lot of our clients didn't know whether they had jobs. They certainly didn't know what had happened to their budgets. That life was really unpredictable and unstable. What was it like for you and the work you had to deliver, the journey you were already on in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Simon, I recall sitting at in a conference room, around a conference room table in London, making those hard decisions, right? And eventually we ended up postponing every single event we had planned from March through June or July. I got my team together. I'm like, okay, we have to pivot. We have to think differently. How can we pivot and make things, either postpone it to the fall of 2020 or make things virtual? How can we pivot to that level? And of course, people were stuck, right? Because you had to worry about getting people back, making sure no one had the virus, making sure people were comfortable, getting people home and set up to be able to work from home. And you have to understand that in a law firm environment, legal industry environment, working from home and doing that legal stuff is not the norm. That has just never been something that the legal industry pride themselves in, right? It was the bigger corporations, right? In the corporate world, the other side of things, the consulting world, that they had that virtual working environment. Yes, people were worried about their jobs. Yes, people were worried about losing their finances, budgets. Yes, I think people were worried about being home and having their children home, right? With them, and how can they be still effective and still give 100% in their jobs. And all of those things, as a company, we had to take into consideration. We had to worry about the people who were living at home by themselves, right? Because from a mental health perspective, it's a lot. It's a lot of strain to take on. So we had to find ways to elevate what we were doing from a D&I perspective, from a mental health perspective, and work across groups, work with HR, align ourselves with HR, and practice groups to make sure that we were still keeping our people top of mind.
And then I guess, Satra, so the list of important things that fell under the banner of inclusion then right now, you're beginning to describe the sort of socio-economic thing, people living with their families, childcare, worrying about whether they've got jobs, just when you thought your list of important things could get no longer, the world was shaken by the events of May 25th, right?
It still brings back that deep feeling of heartbreak, of anger, of sadness. I will tell you, yes, I cried when I saw George Floyd, the video of George Floyd. I cried for Ahmaud Arbery. I cried for Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor could have been me, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and many countless others before them and after them could have been my husband, my brother who has since passed, my nephews, right, or family members. So it hit hard. I also thought about my people at work, the Black employees, the Black business service professionals, the Black attorneys, and how they were feeling. And I had to take a moment. I could not just move right into, okay, here's what we do. Listen, I live for crisis, right? And crisis is not new to me, especially heartbreaking crisis. During the Sandy Hook era, I was, my daughter, as you know, was part of, was a child at Sandy Hook Elementary. So for me, being built of Teflon, I've considered myself Teflon. But yes, sometimes you have a small breaking point or a small moment that, I call it my awakening, right? It's the time where I pause for a moment, but then there's an awakening that you have to be active. Now is not the time to crawl in a corner. You have to be there and you have to stand tall as a leader, right? So I just mobilized everyone. I had forums just for the Black attorneys, just to talk, right? What's happening? How are you feeling? What's going on in your life? How can we help you get through this? And then I pivoted to, let's get all of the Black individuals who work at the firm together in a safe space, in a forum.
Yeah.
And I tell you, there were tears, there were laughter. There were people who talked about going through their own experiences with the police, right? So, but it was also a part of healing, right? Healing so that we could move forward. So we pivoted, Simon. We had to pivot. We pivoted. We created online resources, right? We have a toolkit online about, anti-racism. Anything that you want to read about, articles, books, movies, it was at your fingertips. You just had to click a link and it took you to where you wanted to be. In March, we had pivoted and late March, we instituted what we call looking after each other. These were telephone calls that my team and myself, we picked up the phone and we called every single Black, Brown, LGBTQ attorney in the firm just to check in. And we continue to do those periodic check-ins because you would be surprised about how, people needed that phone call, that touch point from the firm. We encourage our partners across the firm to pick up the phone and call individuals, whether they were people of color or our white counterparts. Everyone needed a phone call. Everyone needed to feel some type of belonging, that the firm still cared. And we did that and we pivoted to that. And we can talk a little bit later on about some of the programmings that we engaged in with steps, just to answer some of the questions that were coming through from the partners.
And we did indeed join you, Satra, at one of your town halls where not only did we hear from expert speakers like Dr. Courtney Cogburn from Columbia, the woman who was responsible for a seminal piece of work, Journey of 1,000 Cuts. We heard from some really moving pieces from some of your white partner population and the kind of personal reflections that they'd had, which I can't think of a better word. They were very moving, right, and very real. And you involved us, right? Could you tell us a little bit about our involvement? Satra, in helping you to get done what you needed to get done?
Absolutely. Listen, talking about race is not an easy topic or discussion point, right? Many times people shy away or skirt around the issue. So we engaged you guys, to really help us think about what would this look like if we created an inclusive leadership session, which we actually coined inclusive leadership in times of crisis. And just the effectiveness of, we have 4 weeks to pull this together and deliver it, was just superb. And I applaud you, Simon, and your team, and I applaud my team as well for stepping up and really developing a powerful piece where we were able to showcase 2 white senior partners who actually took this to heart, put whatever biases they initially had about Black people, Black Lives Matter movement, the breaking of windows in stores, initially being angry, but then joining the march and joining the movement, and talking about restarting the firms from scratch, breaking down systems that have been built based on racist ideals. That in itself was powerful. So for me, those are the moments that matter, especially when people say, what will people remember? And I tell you today, to this day, even if we had that session back, I believe, end of June or early July of 2020, they still talk about those moments.
And Satra, I can hear in your voice just how important that input from them was and meant to you. But I just wonder, just as we conclude, Satra, on a huge topic, what's going on for you right now? Because this ain't over, right? We're still on a journey. How is it for you right now in the work you're doing?
It's ever so more important now, Simon. I mean, listen, it's not just about, thinking about, do we just want a training or one training, or can we just call them and do one thing? As you said, and I love the word, the journey, right? It's just like Dr. Cogburn, a journey of 1,000 cuts, because she shows a journey as well in what her work that she's doing.
Yeah.
But our journey with STEPS, as you said, started back in 2017 when I came over, and really trying to see what would that journey look like, and it continues today. We're getting ready actually to deliver 12 sessions of inclusive leadership to our people across the entire globe, really focusing on allyship and what that means and what it looks like, as well as what it means to really and truly be an inclusive leader. I'm a firm believer that it cannot be one and done. It has to be that continuous discussion about unconscious bias, about race, about allyship, and that we are all, irrespective of our roles, our titles, we are all leaders in our own right. But how can we do that inclusively? And we continue to engage and work with your team, Simon, and yourself, to bring that message across. And, in a virtual world, we did think about what would that look like? And we filmed a virtual session, right? A virtual vignette about what it looks like when conversations are taking place virtually. How do people react to that, right? What's being said? And it's so important that the work continues, even if we cannot be in person, right? You cannot stop the work. You cannot have these barriers in front of you. You need to think, I think about it as being creative and innovative. Find different ways to do it, but to get to the same destination that you're looking to get to. So that's how I view it. And that's what I see as the journey continues with STEPS.
Satra Sampson-Arokium, Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at Dechert. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you for including us on your journey, and thank you for talking to us today.